So let's continue right away with our next speaker, Tori Boeck. She joins us from the Technologie Stiftung Berlin. She helps run the Open Data Informationsstelle, also called InfoPoint, through which she offers support to the Berlin City Administration to publish open data. She will talk about a topic that is very dear to our association as well, namely how to bridge the gap between civil society and the public sector in order to support open data publishing. Thank you, Tori, for being with us, and the floor is yours. You can share your presentation.
All right, give me a second. Full screen, perfect. So I believe you should see the full screen view now. Just give a holler if something isn't working. Beautiful. So yeah, I'll jump right into it. So first of all, thank you all so much for the invitation to be here. I'm sorry that I haven't been able to join for the other talks. I now got the tail end of the last one, but it looked like a really fascinating application and tool. And so I hope you guys have already been able to have some good discussions and insights into open data. But as said, so my name is Victoria Boeck, or just simply Tori Boeck, and I work for the Technologie Stiftung Berlin. And what I wanted to bring today was this presentation on what I'm calling sort of like bridging the gap. How can civil society and public sector collaboration support open data publishing? Because I think that's something very unique about what we actually have here at the Technologie Stiftung with this open data project, is that we ourselves are a nonprofit foundation. So the Technologie Stiftung, and so we do not work for the government. We're not directly affiliated with the government of the city of Berlin, but we have a lot of projects that we complete with them. We have a close working relationship with them. And so we're in this unique position that we do a lot of open data work within the government in Berlin, but we ourselves are not part of the government. And I think that leads to some interesting opportunities and constellations, but also some potential negative aspects of that. And so in this talk, I wanted to kind of present our model, how we work, and then present some of our experiences in terms of what's worked well, what maybe hasn't been as effective. And then I would also then be excited if we can have some conversations, maybe then at the end of the talk. I'll try to leave sufficient time to maybe hear from you how this resonates, if there are similar projects in Switzerland or in other areas of the world that you might be from. Would really enjoy having a dialogue around that. But first, I'll start and I'll tell you, of course, a little bit more about who we are and the work that we do. So to start out with, this all sort of began this OTIS project, this Open Data Informationsstelle, or Open Data Info Point, with a study that my boss wrote a little over 3 years ago. So I think it was published at the beginning of 2018. And it was a study called Open Data in der Berliner Verwaltung, so open data in the Berlin public administration. And the idea of this study was to look at what are the actual or the current challenges that people working in city administration in Berlin are facing when it comes to publishing open data. So what are reasons that there aren't more data sets being published? So at the time that this study came out, Berlin had already been publishing open data actively for at least 3 years, if not a bit longer. Like there was already a healthy number of data sets in the open data portal in Berlin, but there was this general sense that there could be more and that there's something missing from Berlin's open data strategy, that there are some needs that are going unmet and that that's manifesting in kind of a lackluster implementation of open data. And so my boss wrote this study where he conducted interviews with people working in the city administration to try to understand, how does open data publishing work currently in the city government? Where can we identify pain points or other areas where there's an opportunity to maybe optimize processes to be able to get more data published? And so some of the findings from this study, for example, the need for clearly delineated responsibilities with respect to data management and data publishing, i.e. it needs to be clear who's responsible for doing what. A need for a data publishing protocol that's better coordinated and more strategically oriented, that people sort of have a better knowledge of what am I supposed to be doing? How are you supposed to publish data properly? You know, people, especially Germans, I feel, expect there to always be like a proper way to do something, a clearly defined process. And then the last point, a need for more practical and technical assistance with regards to the data publishing process. And it was this third point from the study, especially, that we wanted to address then with our OTIS initiative. And so that meant that in May of 2018, we launched this project, OTIS, so Open Data Informationsstelle, with the idea that we would, through OTIS, offer more support for open data projects and the city administration, that we would kind of be a point of contact. Okay, you work in the government, you have a question about open data, who can you turn to? You can come to OTIS. You can ask them your question, no matter how basic or how complex. And the reason why this need was identified was because there was otherwise no clear position or person that could fulfill this role. Otherwise, if somebody had a question about open data publishing, it wasn't like there was a clearly defined help desk or other point of contact for things like this. There was an open data portal, and obviously there was somebody behind that portal, but then that person was much more concerned with kind of the day-to-day operations of the portal and less and didn't quite have the resources to offer a lot of one-on-one support about what is open data in general. And so the way that OTIS is structured, the team is completely built out of the Technologie Stiftung, so we're all employees of the Technology Foundation Berlin, but the funding for it comes from the Berlin city government, so from the Senate Department for Economics, Energy and Public Enterprises, so the Senatsverwaltung für Wirtschaft, Energie und Betriebe. And so this is truly a collaborative effort between these two entities, that the government gives us resources and above all funding to be able to do this work, and that we, the Technologie Stiftung, staff this team and then provide this level of support for the city government. In terms of concretely then, what it is that we do. So broadly, we support city employees with publishing and using open data. Concretely, what that looks like is offering direct support with data publishing, so like answering questions. So these types of questions can range from anything to, somebody told me I was supposed to publish this data as open data. I don't know what that means. I don't know why I have to do that. Can you help me figure out how do I even get started? So sometimes we get questions on this really basic level of, I have no idea what's going on and I need some help getting oriented. Sometimes the questions are a little more targeted, like, we as a department, we really want to get involved with open data. We really strongly believe in it. We have some ideas of data sets to start with. We just want to get your opinion. Is this the right place to start? And then we can kind of help advise them and take a look at their data and say, oh yeah, this is a really quality data set. And I think a lot of people would start to use this immediately. We really recommend maybe starting with that if you want to kind of go in with the splash. Or we might say, okay, this is interesting data, but it's not quite structured very properly for open data yet. Maybe we can work with you to refine the data quality. And sometimes we get questions that are truly more technical in nature, where the data is all there and it's really a question of what's the best way to make this data available. Should we be publishing a CSV? Should we be considering actually making this data available via an API? And if so, maybe we need to have a conversation with our vendor. Could you help us talk with our vendor to know what needs to be considered to provide an open data compliant API or something like that? That's also a level where we can help. So in total, we sort of run the spectrum between relatively basic, just starting out questions, up to relatively technical. I know what's going on. I just want some advice of really what's the best way to approach this issue. The second aspect of the work we do at OTIS is that we try to build open data networks inside and outside the city administration. So the inside aspect is really important because we've generally noticed this has gotten better over the years. We've been doing OTIS now for 3 years, but especially at the start, the Berlin city administration is enormous. Like, I think technically, depending how you count who works for it, it's like up to like 100,000 employees, like something ridiculous if you're counting teachers and things like that. But so the point is, there's a lot of people that work for the city government, and open data is still not something that all government offices do with the same level of enthusiasm and commitment. And so it can really easily happen that in a certain department, there's just like the one person that's really excited and cares about open data. But if they constantly have this feeling, okay, I'm the only person that's really fighting for this, that they may not feel encouraged or empowered to really be active in the sphere. But if you could connect them with people in other aspects of, or in other departments and other offices who are just as passionate and interested in open data, and give them a chance to exchange experiences and kind of support each other, then there's an opportunity there to maybe increase the interest and uptake in open data within the city by building these networks. And the second aspect of this, building networks outside the city administration as well. I want to touch on this point again later, but we found that it's also really important to be able to connect the people working in government who are publishing the data with the people outside of government who are using the data. This isn't always evident, this usage, or who is actually using my data, and oftentimes people working in government don't themselves know how they would make this connection. And so that's also then part of the network building that we do, is helping people better understand who's using your data, what are they using it for, what are their interests in it. But I want to talk more about that point later. And the third aspect of what we do at OTIS is developing open data-based prototypes and visualizations, which I think is also something somewhat unique about what we are capable of doing, in that we don't just talk about what's possible with open data or what the potential of it is, but that we also want to play an active role in demonstrating that potential and generating that value. And so a major part of our work at OTIS, or at least a significant part of it, is actually then taking open data from Berlin and building something with it, so that we can then go to the city administration and say, look, you published this data and we were able to build this with it, this interesting or useful or just kind of fun tool as a way to inspire and to show what's possible with open data. And those are projects that we are able to implement in-house. So we have some developer capacity within our small OTIS team, and we also have expanded developer capacity within the broader Technologie Stiftung team, so that we're actually able to implement our own prototypes and visualizations, and use that to increase interest in open data. To give them like some concrete examples of formats we use or ways that we try to reach people working in government. So for example, we somewhat regularly organize open data lunches together with our partners in the Senate Department for Economics, that we then bring physically, or the last time was more digitally, but bring people working in government together to just talk about open data topics, to give them a chance to sort of hear what's happening in a different part of government, or maybe what new exciting developments there've been. Also to invite speakers from outside the government to present their projects, and then to have this forum and this opportunity for people to exchange with each other and discuss about these topics. And again, partially from this perspective of just to like see that you're not alone, that there are other people that are interested in these topics too. And then of course, to have an open forum where current challenges around open data can be discussed, as well as like solutions that people can kind of pool their knowledge and their experiences, and be able to maybe collaboratively work on some of these challenges. So that's a format that we've done several times, and I'm hoping we can go back to the physical events soon, because obviously that's a much more effective way to bring people together. But we've also tested it out, and it does work digitally as well. We also are trying to increasingly offer workshops and sort of hands-on experiences building data skills, because we believe increasingly strongly that one of the biggest areas where we can improve kind of understanding and uptake of open data is really just building general data literacy and data competencies in government, because we notice in our experiences and our conversations with people working in government, just how many people still don't really understand concepts like obviously machine readability, and thus how important that is for open data, but also just don't even quite understand how data are used, in the sense of like, how do you build an application out of data, or how do you, what does it look like or feel like to work with data and to try to make something out of it. And so then if you can give people this experience of having actually gotten their hands dirty, quote unquote, with data, then it helps them better appreciate how their future open data might actually be used by other people, and that might inform their efforts to increase the quality of their data. And so like in this picture, for example, this is a workshop we did a couple of years ago, where we offered like an intro to QGIS, which is an open source GIS program, so geospatial information system. And we specifically tailored this to how can you work with open geospatial data to create maps with QGIS. And so we taught government employees how to use this free software, which in our experience is also generally superior to the software that many people in the government are working with, like the one that for which they have a software license. So we're also trying to promote more open source in general in the government. But then also, again, just this chance for people to have this experience of working directly with data and making maps out of the data. And in the process, not just learning how to use an open source software program, but also just in general, better appreciating how to work with geospatial data and with the hopes of increasing their appreciation for the power of this kind of data. I mentioned as well the topic of prototypes, so I wanted to present a couple examples of work that we've done on this front to kind of make it a little clearer. So this is a project that we launched this summer called the Erfrischungskarte, so the refreshment map for Berlin. And on this map, the idea is it's targeted toward those hot summer days where you just really want to find a cool, refreshing place in the city to relax. And so we have combined a few different data sets into this application. And the end result is that there's a few different things you can do. So one thing you can do, you already see in this view that you can see some shading on the map, and you see this clock in the upper right. And so the idea is that this visualization can give you like an estimation or like a suggestion of at a given time of day where you're likely to find shade in the city. And so that's using data on like structures, sort of like 3D building data from the city to sort of analyze, okay, the height of a given building, and if you know the position of the sun at a given point in time, where is there likely to be shade on the street. This is obviously not like 100% accurate every day of the year. We're not calculating it new for all 365 days. So it's most accurate in the summer and then still not perfectly accurate every single day, but it kind of gives you an idea. And other data points that are combined here, you see in the toolbar to the left, there are different points that might be on the map so that you can find where's there a bench in a given location, or where is there a swimming spot, where is there a fountain that you could maybe sit next to and enjoy just the coolness of the water. And so maybe you could combine these things and also be able to find a shaded park bench or something like that. And other aspects of this application, if this is a view where it's a little more zoomed out, but that you see also this color variation. And you can see in the German on the left that this map also analyzes data from the city that shows which parts of the city tend to be cooler than other parts of the city. So the more blue areas would be those that are cooler, as well as areas that are likely to be windier than other areas, which are marked in dark green. So in this case, the two layers are combined, so the colors kind of combine, but you could also individually toggle the layers. But so the idea of this is that, again, you can kind of use this information on as well for a given point in time, because the data is available for different points in time, that you can just sort of make an estimation. Okay, if I really want to find a particularly or a place that is going to be at least less warm and maybe more breezy than other parts of the city, what parts of the city are that likely to be? And so all of this application is using open data that's been published by the city of Berlin. It's using several different data sets, one, the information on like building heights and features, information on the points of interest. Those actually partially come from OpenStreetMaps, so not just Berlin government data, but also OSM data. And then also like this environmental data on cool parts of the city or windier parts of the city is part of environmental data that's published by the city of Berlin. And so here we really just wanted to show a concrete example of you bring all these data sources together and you can create a useful or at least amusing application for people and really show the potential of open data. A second example I want to show, I don't want to spend too much time because I have a couple more points I want to get into, and I also want to have time for questions. This was a project that we did in partnership actually with a government or one of the cities, the government offices in the city, the Senate Department for Integration, Labor and Social Affairs, I think is the translation. And this is where they came to us like with a concrete idea of like, we have all this data that we're publishing on the topic of like Grundsicherung, so kind of like social security, especially for older individuals. And we feel like it's not really appreciated, like just how much data we're publishing and how much detail or how the insights that are possible with this data. And so they approached us wondering if we'd be willing to do a project with the data to kind of just communicate to the outside world through visualizations what you can learn from this data that's interesting. And so we did just a small analysis of the data where, for example, we provided a map to highlight like which parts of the city have a particularly high percentage of individuals that are receiving these income supplement payments, because and who like older individuals who are receiving this. And then we make this clear in the article if you visit the site, but like, you know, the goal there is obviously not to say this is where poor people live in the city. Like that's not the goal. The goal was more to highlight this can inform policy decisions in the city. Like we can identify, okay, if we know that there's a high level of seniors living here that receive some form of income supplement, that's maybe a reason to then also look at this area and ask, is there sufficient social infrastructure in this area? Maybe this is an area where we need to invest more than in senior centers or other offers that are targeted at low income retirees. You know, we try to present it from that angle, that this data can be used to inform policy decisions or at least help us identify potential gaps in how people's needs are being met. Or we also, like, for example, on this page, like look at the historical development of the percentage of people living in Berlin that receive these income supplements. And again, and this was something explicitly that our partners in government asked for, is they were of the opinion that people don't really appreciate that this is something that's steadily increasing, the number of people receiving these income supplements. And again, they were interested in telling that story from the perspective of, we as a society should be aware that more and more people, maybe not radically increasing, but still steadily increasing, are relying on these income supplements. And maybe that's something that we want to look at as a society of what's driving this, and if there's something we can do about that to prevent people from entering old age or other life circumstances and not being able to take care of themselves. So to close, I just wanted to kind of summarize our OTIS experience, because you know, to come back to what I was talking about at the first point, we have this unique role that we're a civil society actor that works very closely with government. And I think that's really fascinating to look at, because it comes with some really distinct advantages and disadvantages. And so advantages that I would see of our approach, that, you know, we're not of the government, but we work for the government, is that we do have this distance from kind of a typical government mindset of, we can't do this because we've always done it this other way. And of course, when you don't work in government and you haven't been exposed to that way of thinking, it's a lot easier for you to say, well, maybe we can try this other thing. Or it never even occurs to you that you couldn't have done it a certain way, because you would have never told yourself that that's not going to work, because the way we think is often just a little different than people that have been working in government for a while. And so I think our kind of, you know, fresh take, or some could also say, you know, naivety, when it comes to tackling some challenges in the government, I think can really be an asset, because it gives us a fresh perspective on issues that you wouldn't necessarily find from people working within government when it comes to solving open data challenges, or maybe being bold and taking a risk in terms of what data you do publish. I think another advantage we have is the ability to implement projects kind of quickly, unburdened by bureaucracy and government procedures, like especially with the technical projects we implement, so like these visualizations and these prototypes, that we have a much easier time developing them, because we have this capacity in-house, so we don't have to go through like a procurement process of like hiring someone to do this for us, which can very quickly get very complicated in government. And as well, topics like hosting, you know, where does an online application live on the internet, that we can generally solve those problems a lot faster than you can in government, where again, like whenever it comes to spending money, there's just often a lot more regulation around that, and it can take a much longer time to clarify, you know, can we pay for server space, and how do we pay for a charge that's going to renew every year, as opposed to something we can write into a budget once and then ignore. So we don't have a lot of those burdens. And then the third point is what I alluded to at the start. We have a certain closeness to the open data community that I think is really an advantage of us, because we ourselves would see ourselves as this community. You know, we don't see ourselves as being part of government. And obviously, if you're part of government, it doesn't mean that you can't be part of this community as well. But in my experience, the people who work for government don't have these touch points to people who are actively using open data from a community perspective or from the perspective of not being affiliated with government. But because we can kind of move between these worlds, that we understand a bit the government mindset, but we also really understand what it's like to just be a person that really wants to work with government data and has wishes for this data or hopes of what data might be published next, that we can kind of move between these worlds and establish a dialogue there, or when it comes to people in government who want to understand how their data is being used, that we can help give them that perspective. So like most recently, for example, we worked with the police in Berlin to publish data on bike thefts in the city. And we worked with them for a couple months, just sort of brainstorming ideas and helping them kind of wrap their head around, okay, if you want to publish this data in a way that's really going to be useful for people, what is sort of the minimum requirements that this data needs to fulfill with respect to, for example, like geographic granularity? Because if you only publish this data for all of Berlin and don't just aggregate with different parts of the city, then it's not particularly interesting, because then you can't tell, okay, where is this problem most prominent in the city, for example. And as part of this initiative, they asked us, they were like, do you know people who would use this data? And we said, yeah, no, we have some contacts. Like, do you want, like, we can just ask people and get some opinions. And they were interested in that. And so I did it. And so I started a dialogue with a group of data users in Berlin and said, hey, the police are interested in publishing this data, but they want to get opinions on how it needs to be prepared for it to be useful, and if you would even be interested in this. And I got some really good feedback, and I could give that back to the police, and it just really gave them the sense of understanding better why they're publishing open data, and why this is useful in the end. And I think this is also important because otherwise my experience working with the city of Berlin is a lot of people who publish data have this sense of, you just kind of put it in the data portal and it falls into an abyss and you never know what happens after, because it's not like you get automatically notified after data is used. And so this kind of solves that problem. I see.
It would be great to start with the question rounds.
This is the last slide.
If you can keep it very short, because we have 13 minutes left.
Okay, so to keep it brief, disadvantages of our approach: significant learning curve. Since we don't work for government, we have to learn a lot about structures, roles, processes, expectations, and we frequently run into walls that we would have never known existed. And maybe we could work a little more efficiently if we had this really intimate knowledge of government. So sometimes this lack of intimacy is an advantage, but sometimes it can also slow us down. The second point I wrote, all carrot, no stick, that we have a limited ability to pressure non-compliers, in the sense of, if somebody says, no, I don't want to publish this, we don't have, like, we ourselves, since we're not part of the government, we don't really have a lot of authority to say, but you have to. All we can sort of say is you should, or the law says you should, but if you don't, we can't do anything about it. So we might be able to wield a little more influence if we were part of the government. And the third point, lack of implementation capacity in government side can lead to heavy reliance on OTIS resources. So I talked about being able to easily host digital solutions or visualizations and things like that. The downside of that is a lot of things then fall on us, because the government says, you know what, it'd be way too hard if we tried to do this ourselves. Can you guys just host this? And that's not necessarily the goal that we wanted, is to host for the next 5 years 20 different applications for the government. We would much rather have that be turned over to them, but that's not always possible if they don't have that capacity. And so then we kind of have to weigh, is it better to just get something out there, even if we have to host it ourselves, or should we take the time to wait and to have them clarify server space and things like that so that they can bring this out and host it themselves? I'll close it there. Thank you so much for your attention. Sorry for going then a little too long in the end. I hope this was interesting. I have my Twitter handle here. And otherwise, I'd be really happy to answer some questions, have some comments, something like that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Super exciting to learning more about what you're doing in Berlin. And I think there are a lot of synergies and similar situations here in Switzerland. We have a first question from Daniela. How did you promote the examples, and did you get any feedback on it, the prototypes that you developed?
Yeah, so we always, like, post our work, of course, like on social media and stuff like that. So we always try to make it visible to the community, for one, or to, like, the broader public in Berlin. And so we frequently, I would say, get really good feedback on social media. So like, for example, to this Erfrischungskarte, that was really well received. Or in the pandemic last year, we did an analysis of like sidewalk widths in the city to sort of see, okay, where is social distancing more or less possible if you're walking on a sidewalk. And that was really well received. And so we generally find that our projects find a lot of like resonance on social media. But we also, of course, want the government, the Verwaltung, to see these examples as well. There, we have some of our own channels, like, that we have like a newsletter, and we do a fair number of like internal presentations within government where we always try to show these examples. And I can say in general, the feedback is almost always overwhelmingly positive, like that people are really inspired to see what's possible with open data. And I think then, especially in government, it makes it really concrete why they're doing this. And they're like, oh, okay, so like something like that is possible. Like that's what you're talking about when you say that, applications of open data can be used to generate value. So we generally find that the feedback is extremely positive. Although, of course, sometimes there's always someone that says like, actually, I think that this, potentially creates the wrong impression, that you may have potentially misinterpreted this, like not in the sense that it's false, but that they're worried that certain data might not be 100% correctly interpreted or understood, or in general, that they're not sure if it's a good idea that just anybody can work with this data. But I would say in general, the feedback's very positive.
Thank you from Daniela. So, any other questions? Another one in the chat. If someone is raising their hand, Darian will catch you. Do you actively approach departments in the administration to work with you?
Yeah, it's a good question. When we started, we were very proactive, because nobody knew us. And so we would do a lot of outreach in the sense of just kind of crawling through government websites. And if we could find a hint of like a data set that we knew wasn't in the data portal, but that we thought should be, we would then try to figure out, okay, who's our contact for this, and just write people, the equivalent of cold calling, but via email, and say, hey, we saw you have this data. It's not in the data portal. We think it'd be really great to publish it as open data. Can we help you do this? And we would just send out tons of these inquiries at the start. I can say now, 3 years later, it is far more common that people approach us and that we then, because slowly, like, our name has gotten out. And so there's this kind of awareness in the government. You're doing open data, you have a question, go to the OTIS. Like other people recommend within government that people come to us, which is beautiful because obviously it reduces some of the load on us. But we still sometimes selectively approach or actively approach different departments, again, if like we have an idea of like, oh, this data is out there, like we read an article, we know it's there, it's just not published, we'll approach people. But to be honest, anymore, we have probably almost more inquiries than we can properly keep up with. So we don't do as much of the actively approaching anymore.
Thank you. It's very interesting to hear that the role changes and the interesting is growing so strongly. Another question in the chat. How did you set up the course on GIS? And there as well, how was the interest in the course? Do you do this on a regular basis?
Yeah, so we initially offered the course twice as like an in-person event. This was, again, a couple of years ago when things like that were easy to do. And the interest was huge. We definitely had way more people wanting to attend than we had spaces for. I'm trying to remember how many people we were in the end able to let in, because we used like this computer lab like you saw in the picture. I think probably we could do like 20 to 30 people at once. And the overflow at that time, or like the waiting list, was probably then like another 10 to 15 people for both times. Like there was a lot of interest in it. In terms of like how you set it up or the ideas, like, so basically when we did it in person, everybody had their own workspace, had their own computer with QGIS pre-installed, and we kind of had like a predefined tutorial that we worked through live, like in the workshop with the screen share, like in the front projector, to show, okay, like first like an introduction to geospatial data and working with QGIS in general, but then step by step, we're going to work together, we're going to grab this data, we're going to build a map together, and sort of showing people how to do that. And then we would go around and like look at people's computers and give them one-on-one help. We're about to do a version of this workshop again as an online event. So we're changing the structure a little bit, like the spirit is still the same, but we're adapting it to do it like via WebEx call. And our plan is that we will record this, and then we'll make the recorded version available just via YouTube and on our website. So if this topic, like, the idea of a QGIS workshop in general is interesting to you, we're doing this at the end of the month. And so then I would expect the video will probably be published sometime in November. So by all means, take a look at our website, OTIS-Berlin.de, and we will later on publish this video there. And then you can kind of see for yourself how we built the course. And we may even, I guess, probably also publish like the resources around it as well, to the extent that we have like a walkthrough or tutorial, because of course we're all about openness and we want other governments to benefit from our knowledge and our work. So we're happy to make resources like that available to other people as well.
Thank you so much. I can't see any other questions in the chat. So maybe a question from my side. You've mentioned that you're missing a carrot or a pressure tool. Do you have any idea how to create that instead of, or in addition to only inspiring and showcasing? Is it something you're working on to change that?
It's hard because to a certain extent, it's not that we want that role. We don't want people to like be scared of OTIS coming around and saying like, all right, guys, get your shit together. Like, this can't do it this way anymore. We want to, rather than be someone that people are like excited and engaged to work with. But on the other hand, like, we sometimes just do have meetings where it's just really clear somebody is not going to do anything until a higher up says, you have to do this. And then like, we can't really do much more than kind of escalate this issue to our partners in government and say, okay, we had this conversation. They don't want to do it. And what can we say in this meeting other than we'd really like it if you do it? To be honest, I feel like that has to change more than on the side of the government than it has to change on our side, in the sense that there maybe needs to be a stronger emphasis on open data, like a top-down emphasis, to be honest, like that more government agencies make this like a clear institutional priority that isn't something that's optional anymore. Like, theoretically or technically, we already have this legal basis in Berlin that it's not an optional thing anymore, that they have to publish it. But of course, reality is different from what the spirit of the law or the text of the law actually says. And so, to be honest, here I would see more that I would love just kind of stronger messaging coming through government that better supports our efforts, that we don't really have to be the bad guy per se, but that people in government just better understand in some cases everybody has to do this. And then we will work with you to make this as easy or even as fun as possible. Like, we'll show you why this isn't just a scary thing or just a burden that gives you more work, but that it can actually be something you can benefit from. Like, that's kind of our role. But I think there's potential here to kind of have added support on the government side to implement some of these open data policies a little more effectively and really honestly through a top-down approach.
Thank you. These are points that we can work on as well, definitely in Switzerland. We have one more question. I really like how you combine open data publication within the usage of data and educating people to play and get to know the data. Are you involved in frictionless data initiative in any way? Last question.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I have to say, like, in short, no, but not for lack of interest or because we don't think it's useful. I've definitely read a bit about frictionless data for a while. I think it's been around for definitely several years. And I find the idea and the publications I read around it really interesting and useful for our conversations. So we aren't like actively involved with the initiative and we don't use any of their materials per se, but I think there is a lot of overlap in terms of challenges that we experience through OTIS that could be, or with data publishing in general, that could maybe be addressed by this kind of approach. And in general, like, I would actually find it really interesting to have more exchange with people working on this subject, but I can say that we personally haven't had anything explicit to do with it yet in our work, but I definitely am interested in and support it.
Thank you so much, Tori. Very, very exciting. We hope we'll hear more from you and your work in the future.